Hey everyone, what's going on? It is Friday afternoon again. Well, at least out here on the left coast. And wherever you are in the world, welcome to another episode of Cinema Crusaders, the show where we talk about older movies and we're trying to expose them to audiences out there. If you haven't seen the movie, go back to them, check them out. And if you have seen the movies, go and watch them again because they're worth watching. And they're great movies that we want to bring to all of you, review them, revisit them, and talk about them. So we are doing fantasy movies this month. But before I get into the movie, which we're going to talk about today, which is Dragonslayer from 1981, I want to introduce my co-hosts. So first, I'm going to introduce, he is a writer. He writes for Omen Comics, Revelation Comics, and for Raincross Press. He's one of my very good friends. I'm talking about none other than Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
Remember that dragons are lies created by the Jedi. This is the first time that I saw it, and I will say I really did appreciate the heck out of it. And I really thought for a moment that, Ian McDiarmid being in it would probably be the best thing in it. And he is fun for a little bit. But, I mean, this movie does hold your attention, and it does do a lot of things right. So it's looking forward to talking about it.
We are going to have to talk about the cast a little bit because not only is Ian McDiarmid in it, but on this viewing that I just had, I was surprised to find out that the guy who plays whatever the dude's name, the dorky museum guy from Ghostbusters 2 is the lead, main male lead of this movie, which I was just shocked to find out. So I'm sure we'll get into that. It didn't take away from the movie, but I was like, holy moly, I can't believe that. So, but before we get into that, I want to introduce another one of my friends and co-hosts on Cinema Crusaders. This man's incredibly talented. He's a filmmaker, a writer, a comic maker. He is a Renaissance man, doing it all out there and with a beautiful head of hair to boot. I'm talking about none other than the man behind Warehouse 9 Pro, Lance Lucero. How you doing, Lance?
Thank you very much. I think my hair is my strength. I don't know.
It is. It makes us want to go out there and buy Bob Non-Union Psychic.
It's all about the hair. I mean, that's a marketing ploy. Yeah. I think it's working.
It mesmerizes us. We're just like, we can't get past power. All right. And then the next co-host I want to introduce, last but not least, he is also a friend of mine. He is on podcasts with me. He's a very talented artist, but besides being a talented artist, he's also a writer. He's another one of those Renaissance men. He works with me at Raincross Press and has his own comics that he works on to boot. I'm talking about none other than Jeff Bracey. How you doing, Jeff?
Vermithrax pejorative. Still the best dragon on screen until arguably Smaug. Yes, indeed. Still my favorite overall dragon movie. Still holds up to this day. Love this film.
Yeah.
Smaug is technically a wyvern, so I'll give it to Vermithrax.
It's the name Vermithrax is so good. George R. Martin stole it for his novels.
Vermithrax pejorative. I mean, how cool a name was that? I mean, just absolutely amazing. And the fact that one of the things I mentioned in the promo on Twitter for this movie was that this was really a crossroads movie, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but one of the cool aspects for me is that this utilizes stop motion animation and regular animation for Vermithrax within the movie, which is really, really cool to see.
Yeah, great work by Phil Tippett on this film.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. First of all, let's talk about the plot a little, the story. And I'm going to go ahead and hit you guys up first before I finish up on story, because I'm always talking about plot first. And I know Jeff loves this movie. So I'm going to go Jeff first and go around the horn counterclockwise. And Jeff, talk to us a little bit about what you think about this story, because I think some of the comments that you were making behind the scenes were very, insightful. And I wanted to hear a little bit about what you thought about the story concept that they did, especially considering this movie is 1981. We talked last week about The Sword and the Sorcerer, which was 1982. And even though I like that film, I want to hear what any thoughts you might have between the two films and how the story was created. So with that, take it away, Jeff.
As I've said on Twitter, I think that this is probably the smartest fantasy film ever made. It's realistic as you can get for a movie about sorcery and a dragon, and it's functionally believable in a lot of ways. In a similar fashion to the Christopher Reeve Superman made you believe that a man could fly. This made you believe in dragons and magic, because it wasn't lightning bolts from the fingertips, fireballs from your eyes. All kinds of I'm animating the earth and the plants and everything, and the dragons aren't it's different, and it's intelligent, like I said, and it makes logical sense within the context of what they're doing here. And for me, this film's fairly high concept. It should have more eyes on it because it's just so well done, beautifully shot, beautifully acted. But the story itself is a many layered thing. It's a coming of age story on a couple of different fronts, and it's a coming of age story for the world as well as a couple of our characters. In that we are seeing a transition here from the last days of magic and myth and sorcery into the burgeoning of Christianity taking hold. Like we're leaving the dark ages behind and moving to the age of Christianity, and with that will come the age of enlightenment as well. So we're leaving one type of magic behind for another type of magic, and that's one of the most interesting aspects of this film to me. And it acknowledges it. Marvel Comics did the comic book adaptation, and I imagine, as they often do when you're doing novelizations or comic adaptations, you're probably looking at an earlier draft of the script. So I don't know if I can credit this to the Marvel writers themselves, but there's an interesting bit at the end where our hero and heroine literally ride off into the sunset, and it gives you that little, like, maybe there's still a little bit of magic left in the world. But if the adaptation is working from an earlier script, when the horse comes up in the comic, Galen says it's probably just a coincidence. He has let go of magic. He has moved on just as the world has moved on, because we're dealing with the very last dragon and the very last known wizard. So it's bittersweet in a lot of ways, because a lot of us love this sort of this fantasy idea of impossible, wonderful things being done, even when we see how terrible they are. And as Ulrich himself says, like the dragons used to dot the sky. And I love how he describes Vermithrax as being old, constantly in pain, crippled, and spiteful. Both these characters are on their last legs, and they know it. And it's pretty interesting because each of them, both the wizard and the dragon, have their kind of hopes for the future laid out in this film, and only one is going to survive. Really fantastically well done story, and it's in some ways I'll say it's kind of brave, because it's not what you would consider a Hollywood story. They took the time to really put together and tell a good story really well, and they put the money into it. They put the means behind it. They cast it extraordinarily well, and it works and it holds up. I don't remember how it did at the box office, but it has obviously stuck for me my entire life, and it's quite the cult classic.
Absolutely. And then as far as box office goes, it did not do very good at all. It grossed $14 million, and it cost $18 million to make. So it didn't do well. I saw it, and I think every D&D nerd that I knew saw it, but I think that we probably contributed most of that $14 million. So, and I thought it was a really incredible movie, but we'll get to that in just a second. Lance, what did you think about the story in this film?
Well, the story is put together extremely well. And I mean, aside from everybody really having a good character arc, it's all a ruse, which is really funny, because your protagonist, although Galen, the protagonist, the wizard's assistant, you think you're in it for the ride to see his entire adventure, and you just realize he's just a tool. The entire time he's a tool. Everything was in motion without him really knowing about it because he was blinded by his own ego. So I think that's the fun thing about it. And I remember originally seeing this at the drive-in with Popeye. The Popeye was the
Yes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm realizing those two movies were out at the same time. Okay.
I didn't realize they were the same time, but I will say that is still one of my favorite movies of all time as well.
and it was an odd thing, sitting through, whatever. I'm 10 years old, and I'm, hanging out with my older brother and his friends, and we go see Popeye, which is, all right, this is off the wall, this Robert Altman flick. This is off the wall. And then Dragonslayer comes up, and I had heard of it, and I knew of it, and I was like, okay, let's go along for the ride. And how it avoids all the tropes, how it is a fresh look at fantasy, is very, very inspiring, because it is not Sleeping Beauty, it is not Lord of the Rings. It's none of that, which was fun, because it's like, well, who's this Spaz Galen, and why do I have to watch him? And it's everything anti-hero, in the way of he doesn't fit the bill, but he sure the heck tries. And when he puts on the armor and he has that James Bond super weapon spear, it wasn't a super sword. He didn't have enchanted armor. It was like he was thrift store made up to fight a god, and I dug it. I was like, this is off the wall. Seeing the Wizard. One of your main theatrical actors of all time, killed off faster than anything. Or Ralph Richardson. I thought, wow, we're gonna see like a conflict of character as he travels. We're gonna see all this funny stuff maybe, but no, they kill him off, and I'm like, okay, so there's a twist there. How is this gonna happen? And then you realize that his true assistant is not Galen, but his manservant Hodge. Hodge is in control of it right now. So by default, once again, when he's killed, Galen finally gets it passed to him. The ball is passed to him. So he's like not even second string. He's third string. And these twists are amazing in the story because it keeps the story fresh. And that's what kept me going as a kid. The look of the film. The pacing of the writing, the development of the characters, the arcs of the characters, everything fits into place. Even if you're the villainous king and his cronies, they all had an arc. Everything comes together neatly in this well-written script. So, and I think that's what keeps you going, because once again, It's the characters, it's the writing, even though we all want to get to, well, just show the dragon. Let's see the dragon. How they did a lot of smoke and mirrors, how they didn't truly reveal it to was absolutely necessary. I think that's true filmmaking. It
really was less is more.
You don't need to blow your wad. It was like, here you go. Let's take you for the ride, and let's build the suspense. And I think that's what makes this movie unique and timeless. It's a rare thing. It helps, when you have a director like Matthew Robbins, who did Corvette Summer before this. I reviewed that in a retro review, and he is of the Lucas Spielberg clan. He worked on the original THX 1138 short film. He was juiced into something. And here's a guy that is like, while as a writer he did extremely well, and as a director, to me, this effort was legendary. He should have did more. I don't know what went wrong here, other than this movie doesn't fit the commercial tropes. You don't have the muscle man as the hero. You have the old decrepit, really old decrepit wizard, and a very ugly environment like Monty Python. It isn't glamorized. So I'm wondering what the turnoff was with such a high caliber and high quality movie. But then again, we're going back 40 years. Tastes were different. Mm-hmm. We don't really know what was up with a lot of things, and this didn't fit the mold. It didn't fit it.
He could have ended up getting the same treatment Lucas did with THX 1138, where he tries something high concept and he managed to get some real talent behind it. But it nearly destroyed Lucas. So
yeah,
that was the same issue here.
This movie was a collaborative effort that was greenlit by Paramount and Disney Studios, which
Yeah.
surprised me that Disney was involved. But I think what you may, this is just me guessing, but I'm remembering the other movies at the time and what fantasy was at the time, and it was sword and sorcery, almost to a T. It was sword and the sorcery. It was Conan, So
80s was a big decade for sword.
Right, and this is the unique one of it, because I mean, I thought it was really cool to have that super spear he had. It was like, okay, that added a whole different look and dynamic to this makeshift knight that's going to go out and fight a god. So I mean, I think that's what helped it stand alone, and plus the hero, not the hero type. So it went against a lot of the grain of what Hollywood expected, and of course it's high dollar too. And I know this is when Disney was dabbling with getting into more adult-sided entertainment, because a couple years later with Never Cry Wolf, that's when they had Walt Disney Studios to say, okay, we're going to start to do this more adult stuff to break away from what people are traditionally supposed to see of a Disney. So I'm wondering if the Disney stamp kind of ruined it.
Just 2 years before, they also did The Black Hole. So like Disney was being very experimental in this time.
Yeah, they also did what is it? 1985. They went back to fantasy, but this time animated, and did The Black Cauldron, which I also think is a very good movie, and got very poor reception, because I think in a similar vein,
went against the branding.
It went against the tropes as well, because the hero of the story is somebody who is not a classical hero type. He's a kid who happens to have a magic weapon. I mean, it's very similar to Dragonslayer in a way. And the Horned King is this incredibly powerful villain who loses out to a kid, a magic weapon, and people working together. He's not.
This is why Disney started diversifying their companies. Like Disney has actually produced a great number of films that are outside of their safety net of the family-friendly stuff, and outside their genres. They produce horror movies, but you would never know it. I believe like Miramax is one of their
Miramax. They bought out Miramax in the 80s, and they stuck with them for a good 20 years. Touchstone Pictures, they for the raunchy comedies and so forth. So they were branching out, and this was the time that they started. Dragonslayer, Black Hole, Never Cry Wolf. It was the early 80s. They were like, okay, late 70s, early 80s, let's try to compete and not get stuck into that corner of all these animated movies or totally family-oriented movies at the times, like Bedknobs and Broomsticks and all that kind of stuff.
I think that probably had a lot to do with Eisner, because this was when they did Something Wicked This Way Comes, and a bunch of those movies.
Yep, another one. So it was edgy, and this is the true definition of edgy. Dragonslayer. When you think sword and sorcery or fantasy and dragons, Dragonslayer is the edgy one. That's the cool one off to the side. That's the one that everybody's like, oh yeah, let's do it like that, because it is. Its soundtrack is original. The special effects are state of the art, totally, blowing away the Ray Harryhausen stuff. And, not any disrespect, but technology advanced, and it advanced in the right way, because it sells, and it's still pretty good today. It holds up.
We're definitely going to get into that.
This is where Phil Tippett created Go Motion, which was the smoothing process that made the animation look so realistic.
But we are definitely going to get into the production aspect of this film, because I think it's worth talking about. I call it a crossroads film, because I really believe this is a combination of old technology and new technology. But this is where I think it's one of those films that you can study to see the combination of the stop-go animation, actual hand-drawn cell animation that they were drawing things in, and also practical effects.
Those marvelous animatronics that are in there. They built a 40-foot dragon for this film.
Yeah, you got that as well. I mean, so there were a whole bunch of things in there, but I think I'm going to go so far as to say I watched the movie a couple times this week. In many ways, I think that this is superior to what you would get from a fully CGI dragon. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and we'll get into talking about that. Steve, what did you think of the story in the film? And
Yeah,
I just want to say, this is your first time watching it, correct?
Yeah, I had not seen this before this week, so I was really kind of interested to see, how well it held up, how well it looks after 40 years, basically, and it actually holds up very, very well. And I would say that after watching Prey, I would rather have the practical effects in this movie over the CGI in that film. But that's a whole nother discussion. I will say, as far as the story goes, I was really, I do agree that this is definitely a movie that subverts expectations in a good way. We talk about, we're just trying to subvert expectations, by trying to break it down. This is not what this movie is. It's trying to misdirect you and give you something better in its place. And I think that it does that, because at first I'm looking at this movie and I'm thinking, okay, this story is about this guy learning to be a wizard. He's inherited this magic necklace. He's trying to figure out what to do with himself. He's arrogant. He thinks he's drunk on the power that he's just inherited. After being an apprentice for how many years. And he's feeling his oats, and he's doing stupid stuff. And it gets Hodges killed. And then he has to learn from that. But it's beyond kind of that. All of this whole time, it's like you were never all that, dude. You were never all that. You were never anything. But I think the idea is like, look, you're not going to be able to, grow in power the way that you imagined, because magic is no longer going to be a thing. So you have to find a different kind of power that works for you and works for the age that you're living in. And I feel like that was really like his arc, and I think that's a pretty good one. I really enjoyed that. The other thing I really like is the way the world is built, and the way the society is dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
You really have a situation that reminded me a bit of like classic stories like Ursula Le Guin's The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, or stuff like Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. In fact, they even call it a lottery. This whole idea that this entire society is propped up by human sacrifice. The whole idea is like, we have a functioning society, but that's only because, we're allowing people to die so that their blood can sustain us, and is that ethical or not? And it basically, and yet it never treats the villains as one note bad guys at any point. They're not caricatures. Even the king, who, he's kind of an idiot. He's not a very good king, but at the same time, it's like, okay, his main motivation is the love for his daughter and protecting his daughter. And it's like, okay, this is kind of like what George R.R. Martin talks about with character development. You have people that, may be pretty bad, but they have this, this one little redeeming feature that makes them human. And I really kind of felt that.
One note on that, interestingly, even Tyrion, who is, ironically named, given the more famous Tyrion now, I think, for most of society.
I wouldn't be surprised if Martin read it. Or watch this. I will put it that way.
Even Tyrion, who is a fairly despicable character, has a good reason in his mind for doing what he's doing. He thinks that he's protecting the realm.
I think he's kind of lawful stupid, but it is a valid reason.
I think he's what I like to call ruthlessly practical.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how old the dragon is. I mean, because the king started the lottery when the dragon was already old, and that was part of the plan. Like, maybe we can just outlast it. And so, you have to wonder if, like, Tyrion, maybe being a man-at-arms as he is, maybe his father was one of the soldiers who went down with the king's brother and never returned. And that had an impact on him. I've seen this thing burn down villages and crops and everything. We don't have a chance against it. So
you're probably right,
the
Sam.
lesser of two evils. And he is an advocate of that, even beyond the king's rule.
Yeah, the enforcer, sometimes just follows orders blindly. Or they're conditioned to stay the course, like he is. He's conditioned to stay the course, which I think was interesting because at one point, he thought Galen killed the dragon. And then if that's the case, where's your worth if you're not enforcing something?
Responding to Tim, not only George R.R. Martin, but Guillermo del Toro has even said that this is one of his favorite fantasy films, and he rates Vermithrax up there with Maleficent as his two favorite fantasy dragons of all time. So
there you go.
That's high praise.
Yeah. So for me, I think you guys have hit on most of the elements of the story very, very well. The one thing I will say is that even the characters who act, I'm going to say quote unquote stupidly in this movie, because we're judging them from outside of the film looking in, and I'll give you an example in a moment, do so out of some sort of believability and with a purpose that is believable as a character. And the first one that comes to mind is Princess Elspeth, who's an incredibly noble character. I mean, but I said she is noble to the point of suicide, literally. But
she would have been a good queen, but I think she feels such a overwhelming sense of guilt and responsibility that she feels she has to. And I think it drives her to a decision which is very foolhardy in my view.
Correct. And I think she's
foolhardy or just.
She thinks she's doing it to save her people, and it's unfortunate. Absolutely, Tim. Absolutely. And I mean, she is, of all the people in the movie, I would say she's the most noble person, except for maybe the wizard, who knows that he is, taking on sacrifice. But I think that he is resigned to that fact as well. He's old and everything else. I mean, the princess is in the prime of her life and is got all the advantages of the world. She could easily have been a Game of Thrones villainess and instead decides to sacrifice herself for her people. It's just sad that, not a day or two later, the dragon's going to end up dead, but it is what it is.
Well, it's the same thing with Valerian and her father. I mean, he's a liar just like the king. He pulled a ruse. Yeah. So class structure really had nothing to do with it.
Wonderful parallel there.
Yeah, I will say that Valerian gets a good arc as well. I mean, she's somebody who feels like she has to hide who and what she is, and she gradually sheds the the false identity she's put on, and really is allowed to become more and more herself. And then she becomes an equal partner in destroying the dragon, which I think is really
right. I mean, she does not
fit. 1980s.
Yeah, she doesn't fit a trope. She doesn't fit a stereotype of being rescued. She's proactive, though. She's the one that brought them to the wizard at the beginning of the movie. She was 100% proactive. She drove the story forward always. And when her transition comes, it's hilarious because once again, if they would have waited it out, she would have been okay. But so you have these circumstances in the writing that work out perfectly. Like, whoa, if it was just written out a little longer, it would have been okay. But everybody has such a hair up their ass. They want to act, and it just screws them in the end. Really, and that's the best part about it.
They did need all these things to happen. They did need to happen because if they did wait, if Vermithrax does die, then the chicks still grow into dragons, and it's unfortunate for like the characters in the movie, but it kind of had to play out this way for us to have the happiest ending possible, I guess.
And I will also add, Vermithrax reminds me of the alien queen from Aliens. Like his only motivation is to protect his young. He's not going after these kids to feed himself. It's like, I want to feed my children so that they survive. That's a completely understandable reason, and it makes the character more interesting.
And to their credit, the people who wrote the film gave Vermithrax a moment where you see that, which is so Vermithrax
he mourns his baby.
Is it even a pure villain? They've got a motivations. They're villainous because of the circumstance they're in. They're villainous because it's an us against nature type moment.
Yeah, so it's not just her nature; it's the fact that she has something at stake too. I've always just assumed Vermithrax was female as soon as we found out she had chicks.
I did too.
One of the most touching scenes in the film, amazingly, is watching this mighty dragon nudge the last brood it's ever going to have, and realizing they're dead. Yeah, and then the rage that follows that is so justified. And
the thing
this animatronic thing sells it. That's how
animatronic. This animatronic wins out over CGI any day, because when her head rises into frame and you see the eyes, that's real. That's real animatronics, and then mixed with sound mix, the sound mix of the voice, the growl, it creates emotion. So it is just not a pretty thing to look at or a CGI piece of art. This thing was created to create that emotion. So it worked.
Breathing character.
and you go, oh dang, people go, oh dang, because they know it's going to go down bad now. So when you create that kind of emotion, you sell it. That's it. That's cinema.
Not only that, the shock value of seeing Vermithrax's face for the first time still has not worn off by this time in the movie, because we've only seen the face about 5 minutes beforehand. They saved it deliberately to give you the full weight of Vermithrax before that. Beforehand, all of the horror of Vermithrax was sold by some great acting as the people were incinerated, because they were looking up at the dragon as it was breathing fire down on them. So some great camera work there as well. And we'll get into that in just a moment. A couple of other things I wanted to say, though, about the film is another thing that I very much appreciated about this story was the fact that the way they did magic, the way the magic was presented, it was almost tokenesque in the way it was presented. And that it was magic was a manipulation of the natural world around you in order to achieve whatever it is that you wanted to do. So it wasn't your classic sword and sorcery like someone else had mentioned, where you're shooting lightning from your fingertips, which I don't have a problem with. Don't get me wrong. I'm a fantasy nerd, but this was just something that I had never seen before, because my exposure to Tolkien at this point was mostly The Hobbit and reading the books, and I hadn't really thought about it that much. And there's not a whole lot of magic in The Hobbit, to be perfectly honest with you, which was the only real feature that I had seen, feed with Gandalf in it. And so here it is, this wizard calls down lightning to strike the dragon. And I've said this sticks with me to this day. I mean, it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, if not my favorite. But instead of the lightning coming from his fingertips, somehow he's channeling it right through him. He is directing lightning from the clouds to strike the dragon, and he strikes the dragon, and the dragon is falling to the earth. When I watched this movie the first time, I thought he had actually succeeded, that somehow he killed the dragon. And then to see the dragon recover and come back for the wizard, I was floored. I mean, I was just hooked.
As much as I love D&D style magic in more modern style films, this movie and Excalibur, for instance, are great examples of magic on screen rooted in the medieval thought about the practice of magic. And it's really beautiful. I love, all the incantations are in Latin, and some of the stuff for Excalibur, I still remember the charm of making Danal Nathrak Uthbaspeka Dakyen Devende. That sort of stuff sticks with you. It just resonates. And you can imagine how they went about this, studying the seasons, and he's telling Galen not to mess with his reagents, and his powders and all this stuff. And you see all of his gear, and again, it all feels so plausible, even though we know this is fiction, it's fantasy. But I love how grounded even the most abstract elements of this are, including the magic.
What sells it, though, is the studious nature of it. I mean, I like a rule behind it, and we've discussed this behind the scenes in our writings. Even is that behind the artifact or behind the spell, there's a studious nature. It isn't just you're shooting lightning out of your hands because you're powerful now. No. The wizard is as old as he is because he's as studious as he is. He understands the practice. So even when he conjures lightning, what does he do first? He conjures rain clouds. He conjures a storm to be able to channel that energy. It all makes sense. And I like it when the magic makes sense, because when it gets too half-cocked and people are shooting stuff out of every orifice and burning things up, it's like, all right, I'm done, because I don't buy it. I'm sucked out completely.
The other thing is that Galen has a definite weakness. He's bound by the amulet, but more than that, he's bound by the will of his master in the amulet. Yeah. And you realize that towards the end. The reason he can't cast certain spells at certain times is because his master is saying, "No, I am not wasting my magic on that stupid thing. You're being an idiot. I'm not letting you have this power." So that's really interesting. That's a really interesting drawback.
Yeah, you nailed it. Yeah, and it's like being a loose cannon when he creates the avalanche, because maybe the wizard thinks it's a good idea, and then they go overboard like an atomic bomb. It's like they bring down a mountain.
Aside from initially trolling Hodge, which is probably allowing him just to get a feel for manipulating the energies from the amulet, it's like I love the scene where he's in there with the chamber of the king, and the king wants to see just what kind of wizard he's got, and he can't do anything because now he's being completely selfish with it, and so it fails him utterly.
Exactly. Yeah, his master wants him to use his power for good, and if he's not using, if he's using his power for selfish reasons, he's just going to shut it off.
And so the last part I wanted to get into story before we move on to another topic was the very last scene, or the next to last scene of the film, I thought was so clever. And it was such a clever commentary. And if you guys want to comment on this at all, please do. But I thought it was so clever that they took a shot at politicians and organized religion in the next to last scene in the movie, where the hard work is done, the dragon is dead, and the religious leader comes up, and they're claiming that God has smote the dragon through their prayers.
It's a new age.
And then as if that's not enough, then the king has to walk up. The dragon is dead, guts everywhere, and he puts a sword into the middle of a dead dragon, and they just proclaim Dragonslayer. And I'm like,
Imperious Rex, Dragonslayer.
yeah, because your God was so useful when Ian McDiarmid is standing up to him, giving that fire and brimstone speech, and waving his holy staff, and he just gets a fireball to the face, and that's it.
My favorite part about that whole bit is like the villager who takes up the role as priest doesn't even know anything about the Bible. Like at least Ian McDiarmid, he's like a real priest. You figure he's probably been cloistered in a monastery, or he's been to seminary, or whatever they did in medieval times. And this guy's like, it's like, let's praise God for vanquishing devils and demons. That's other things I've heard him say. Yeah, that's the ticket.
It goes back to Monty Python to me. It's like, okay, people are just people. Their beliefs sometimes screw things up, and victors write the history. So there it is.
I really would not be surprised if they were influenced by Holy Grail a little bit.
Oh,
absolutely. Certainly there is a visual similarity.
Yeah.
And even as an 11-year-old kid, or 10-year-old kid, I got it. I got it then. And now, much older and much maybe wiser. I don't know. That's debatable. As my wife rolls her eyes at me over here.
Sophisticated, maybe
it just makes it that much funnier to me, because I look at it, especially I thought the one was kind of like the priest made me roll my eyes, but then the politician, the king, rolling in and putting a sword into a dead dragon, and then he's reclaimed Dragonslayer. I'm just like, this is so perfect. I can't even get enough of it.
And when I saw it originally, I was with, my brother and his buddy, hippies, 10 years older than me. They're teenagers still, 19 years old. Oh, those fascist kings, man. F them. They were like, look at that. Oh, he's taking credit for stuff, dude. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of lame.
Oh, man. All right. So I don't want to shortchange the cast. But I will say that I do kind of want to go through the cast sort of quickly, because I think there's a lot to talk about from a production standpoint here. So with that said, I'm going to go to Lance first on, I'm going to go Steve first on cast, because I want to get to Lance first on production, if that's cool. So Steve, for the cast, talk a little bit about the cast in general, if you want, or one person in particular. I think there's several people we could talk about, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts on the cast were.
I really was not familiar with most of these people coming in. The only one that I kind of recognized was Ian McDiarmid, and I will say, like, in the short time that he gets, he's very, very good, and and he is one of those classic British, classically trained actors, and he absolutely owns the few minutes that he gets. And I will say, I love that last scene he gets, when he confronts the dragon. It is so hilarious. It is so impotent. He's not being Emperor Palpatine at all. He is a different class of slimy character. But and you can kind of make jokes. Okay, yeah, he's Emperor Palpatine, and he's pulling this little Sith speech, and he's not a Sith. Okay, great. But that was the only actor that I really, really knew. Of these other actors, I mean, it's a really good ensemble. I mean, there are a lot of really good actors, and I think probably the ensemble comes together more because I really didn't know who they were. These are not people that, I was looking at, like, the actress who played Valerian. I think her name was Caitlin Clark. She really wasn't around that long. Like, I think her last movie was in like early 2000s. I mean,
Yeah.
that was
She's-
unfortunate.
She's mostly a theater actor. She was in Broadway until the mid '90s, and then did a lot of regional musical theater after that. So,
Yeah,
you know,
and she did a lot of TV, and she did some 80s TV, you know,
Yeah.
things like Matlock and things like that. And I just kind of think that's kind of unfortunate, and I kind of wonder what happened, because she was very good at this movie. I mean,
She
I think
died
she
young.
definitely had the most. Oh, she did.
Yeah, she
Oh,
died
that's
young.
unfortunate.
Yeah, 52
Yeah.
in 2004.
yeah, she.
that's sad.
Oh, that's a shame.
I'm not sure what she died of, but I saw that as well. I was a little shocked by that.
Yeah, I mean, she's a great, you know, romantic lead. I was kind of worried at first that, you know, okay, you know, is this is the romantic chemistry really going to work with the two leads, and you know, how well would these two, you know, bounce off each other? But you know, by the end, you really were kind of sold on both of them, and I think that they hold the movie together. I mean, and that's really, really great. The guy that played the wizard is really good. You know, and it's not surprising to me that this is a guy who's, you know, been in British acting for a lot of years, and you know that he comes across as having a lot of experience. Yeah, I mean, and he definitely comes across as the voice of reason, the voice of his experience. You know, the guy who really has all the answers and who really had the plan. I think that he sold that absolutely beautifully. And then you get all these other, you know, characters, just the ordinary citizens. They're very, very believable, you know, in their roles, and they inhabit the background, and they don't distract you, you know, in any way. You know, the king, this guy plays this buffoon so well, and I just love how he looks like, you know, this kind of king that would have been in a classical tapestry. You know, he just has that look about him.
You know, it's so
the kind
interesting.
that would look like a Dragonslayer and just isn't, you know, when you find out about it. So he's really, really good. The villains are all good. Yeah.
But I think that what's so interesting about the king character, and I think this comes out partly in the acting performance as well, is when you really see the passion, greed, and covetousness of the king, is when he's trying to use the amulet for his own means to turn lead into gold. So, you know, which is pretty cool.
I love it's like, it's not even magic. He's like, by my divine right as king, lead be thou gold.
You know, that's very interesting, Tim. That's a great
Absolutely
point.
correct.
Yeah, that is true.
So let me go to Jeff, and then I'm going to go to Lance, and then I'll wrap up this one as well. Jeff, what did you think of anybody in the cast or the cast in general and that kind of thing? So,
I think Steve really covered it all. I will say, in defense of the priest, Ian McDermott's turn as priest, which shockingly I didn't know that was Ian McDermott until you guys started saying his name here after all these years. I was like, oh, okay, you know, if only he had those force powers, like the dragon would have had a problem.
Yeah.
Talk about lightning from the fingertips, right? I actually don't see him as a slimy character. I see him as a true believer. He was honest to goodness, a true believer. And
I agree with that.
Steve
when he was talking about, no, there's no dragons, they don't exist.
Yeah, I don't think that was being slimy. I think that's just what he thought. Like, because he proclaimed the dragon Satan. He thought for sure the dragon was Satan.
Yeah.
And so he was a product of his own times and his own education. And his own
Maybe it's
upbringing.
all those years of him playing Palpatine rubbing off on me.
And not only that, though, but I think there was that quality of overpiousness in that he is the true warrior. So to me, that was a little slimy. It was now I've God on my side, and I'm going to vanquish Satan, and I will be the savior.
I think he believed his own hype.
Slimy. I see it as being a flaw, because here's the weird thing. Each of these characters, in their own way, even the villainous type characters like the king and Tyrion and things like that, we see it in the daughter. We see it in her father, the blacksmith. We see it obviously in Galen, a guy who should not be a fighter. He steps up. Galen was twice the man of any man in the village. Now she's twice the woman. Everybody, surprisingly, in this film, whether they're a good guy or a bad guy, is actually surprisingly courageous, except for people who are meant to be absolutely chicken shit, like the voice of the king, duly ordained, and he's always fleeing the scene. Those kinds of guys, because they're either brave by their actions or they're brave by their convictions, even if it's a reprehensible thing to do.
Absolutely, Tim.
Yeah,
absolutely.
for sure. There is one thing I would like to bring up because Lance mentioned it. I didn't want to go into the actors as much, but I want to talk about the spear for a moment. I think this is such a cool idea here, because typically in sword and sorcery, what we see, it's always the magic sword. Galen's not a fighter. He's turns out to be surprisingly competent physically for a guy who spent most of his time studying. But I don't know if they understood this at the time, if they'd done their history research, but I have to expect they have because this movie's so good. The spear is the perfect weapon for a novice. The spear is often called the king of weapons because you can put a long pointy stick in the hands of somebody who has no training and they understand how to use a long pointy stick. And it's the only reason he survived more than 10 seconds against Tyrion, because Tyrion is a true warrior, but he has to get past the long pointy stick to get at Galen.
You know what else?
It's a very difficult thing to do.
The way Galen wins that fight against Tyrion is believable. It's fantastical because it required a magic weapon, but it's believable.
But it's great because he helped.
And also, I mean, Bruce Lee always was afraid of the beginner.
Yeah, and because they'll tell you when you take martial arts, like if you want to prepare yourself for street fights, fight the people who've got no experience coming into martial arts. Spar with the guys who are new, because they're going to be unpredictable. They're going to be erratic. You don't know what's up their sleeve. They're just going to try stuff. You have no clue. And I love the smithing of the weapon. So still incorporating the magic into the technology. And he understood what his weapon could do, but Tyrion wasn't there to see that, and that ends up being his downfall. It
occurred to me as you just now, and I'm surprised I never put two and two together. I'm wondering if Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman ever watched.
Oh, is this where the Dragonlance came from?
Dragonlance, yeah.
I could see
this. Who knows how many people this movie influenced? Like it seems like it's a lot of ripples in the pond.
Yeah. Because not only that, there is a scene in Dragonlance books where Theros Einfeld throws a Dragonlance and it splits an anvil in half.
Yeah.
And there's a scene in this movie where they test the lance or the spear on the anvil and it cuts the anvil. So
I think you're onto something, man.
Yep.
And that heat metal spell is a thing in D&D. So,
but I loved how once again this was an application of magic that made sense.
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm not just going to write a whole bunch of runes on this. Now this spear can cut through anything. It's like it took effort to enchant the spear. And that's something you rarely see in a movie. Like I kind of wish they had done that, although they didn't have time with Lord of the Rings. But like when you reforged Narsil into Anduril, that would have been kind of a cool scene to see.
Yeah. Well, the idea too is this is a man-made weapon.
Mm-hmm.
So this was just waiting in lieu of something, and it was a man-made weapon. It wasn't enchanted, no magical spells. It was just enhanced by magical fire. Got it hotter and made it tougher. So that's what I liked about it too. This weapon was waiting for its moment.
And it still wasn't the end-all be-all, because it still had the weakness of using like a teak shaft or whatever, which eventually failed.
Yeah. Yep. And that's the cool part, is that that cool ass weapon got broken because they had a point of failure in it, which is once again great storytelling. So
this movie defies all the expectations. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Grounded magic, man.
And I was expecting, like, when Valerian went out to get those dragon scales, like, okay, she's gonna put it into like a scale mail armor or something. No, it's a shield.
Yeah, which
and
makes
that works
sense.
so much better.
And also that is another element, and I actually went back and looked because I was curious, because it's become such a part of fantasy and D&D and fantasy literature of the scales of a dragon being used to protect against the dragon's breath weapon. Well, you know where that comes from? That came from this movie.
Yeah.
But it also makes logical sense.
It does, but it's amazing how influential this movie was on a whole genre afterwards, and yet it really doesn't get the love I think it deserves. So Lance,
that's why I wanted us to discuss it, because this movie needs a lot more eyes on it.
Yeah, Lance, what did you think of the cast? What are your thoughts on the cast?
Well, initially, I mean, Ralph Richardson struck a chord. I mean, he's the supreme being in Time Bandits. He's also the computer expert, like in Rollerball. He's the Oz. He's always, to me, as growing up, that's the role he fulfilled, was the sage, the elder, the person of knowledge. So he was recognizable from the get-go. And then you get this hodgepodge of the actors of the time, like an Ian McDermott, McDermott. How do you say his name? McDiarmid or something?
McDermott.
Yeah.
McDermott.
He was already in Star Wars movies. I mean, Tyrion, John Hallam. He was already in Flash Gordon.
And he was also a very well-established BBC actor and a stage actor.
Hammer films, all this stuff. I mean, these faces were recognizable, and Peter Ear, the king, they already had a history. They already had a run at it. And then Peter, McNichol comes out of nowhere. And it's like, who is this guy? I don't know what he's in. I've never seen him before. Why do I want to watch this spaz? But it worked perfectly. So you had professionalism all around in this film, and that's how it was in the day. They know who to go to. They knew who to employ. Oh, this guy's solid. We worked with him on this flick. Oh, yeah, I saw him there. All right, get him over for an audition. So, I mean, overall, you can't fault any of this cast whatsoever. This is what you call, once again, an ensemble that does their job in the best way. And of course, none of them are commercial. None of them are highly recognizable. So which makes it edgy again.
Yeah, look at what a risk that was. Like today, you would cast somebody like Chris Pine in the Galen role because you'd want a face. You'd want somebody that everybody knew to give the film that extra bankability.
Yeah, which we all know in a sense doesn't work a lot of the times. But the point is this is a film that took that risk. And I also think it worked. This is one of those examples of, no, you stick true to casting and you're going to get the right cast. And here it is. So, that's cinema once again.
Yeah. And Tim just brought up a great point that I'm going to expound on a little bit, which was that with Peter McNichol. I mean, he was good in this. And I think that you could see he has that quirky comedic timing, comedic quality to him that works in this, in his role here. And then he went on and he tried to become a dramatic actor. And I think he was good in some of the stuff that he did later. I mean, this was his first ever movie. And then he was in Sophie's Choice and he was in Heat and American Blue Note, and I don't think he was bad there, but, really, if I'm talking about this guy, and I didn't even realize it was the same person until a couple days ago. But
Vigo!
I think of his role in Ghostbusters 2. I think of him in Addams Family Values as the camp counselor. And a number of other movies. I mean,
good character actor.
He was in Bean. He was in Dracula, Dead and Loving It, and eating up the scenes comedically versus Leslie Nielsen, which is not an easy thing to do. He was in Radioland Murders, another, I think, chronically unappreciated film, because I think that movie is very funny as well. But maybe we'll get to that movie eventually. But I think that is where his real strength is. But he was not a bad actor on any level. I just think that his natural talents lended itself more to being that quirky character actor later on in his career, and he's had a very good career.
And I think this movie helped him because the moment he loses his buffoonery, you can see he's serious.
I forgot about that.
Ally McBeal's boss. Yeah, you see his seriousness when he's fighting that dragon. You see that he may be going to his death when he's going to the lair. So that's the mark of a good performer, because look, he's no longer that apprentice. He's got to put up or shut up, and you see that in his performance, and it plays out.
Was he any relation to Christy McNichol, or is that just coincidence?
No, that's just, I think their name is even spelled differently.
Okay.
I don't think that might be something to look up, but I don't think so.
How easy would it have been for this guy just to cut and run? Like, he had nothing at stake other than wanting to fulfill his master's last wish, if you will. But he toughed it out the whole time. It was like, and that's why
it's a simple time. No TV, no internet.
I just appreciate. I just can't help but appreciate every time I think about it, just how brave in their own way the majority of the characters in this film are. It's terribly brave in a way to have to live a lie to save yourself. It's terribly brave knowing that you could risk ostracization, imprisonment, or execution if the king finds out you've been hiding your daughter all this time. But that's the length you would go to. So, like, again, and I love the fact that the characters in the movie and the movie itself has all these great layers. That's one of the things that makes this such a great
Writing.
Yeah, great writing.
That's it.
And then
writing.
finding out the lottery is rigged anyway. You know,
Right.
it's like all the
A
people
great
that are
twist.
rich are buying their way out of the lottery.
A
And I'm
great
just
twist.
like, yeah, that's totally believable.
Completely
That makes
unexpected,
absolute
man.
sense.
But like Elspeth's power move was not expected.
Mhm.
All right, so let's then get to the final topic I wanted to talk about, and I think it's up, but no less important than anything else we talked about, which is the production of this movie, because I thought the production of this movie, the look of this movie, is fantastic. And so I want to go to Lance first on this one. Talk to us a little bit about what you saw in the production of this film.
Oh, this is top notch. Production of its time, and it still holds, even in the matte paintings. The perfect blend of animatronic.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, see ya. And puppetry and stop motion animation to create the dragon. The environments, from the studios to the beautiful landscapes where they shot it on location. Everything works out well. The photography, the directing, this is a top-notch Hollywood movie, international Hollywood movie, because, it was made overseas. So, that sticks with you. It sticks with you to say, well, that's kind of what I want to do. I want to make it look like that. I don't want all this green screen backgrounds. I don't want costumes that look like they just came out of the costume shop. We talked about this stuff before. This is an era where it works, where they were using what they had, and it looked great. So, there's no fault in it at all. There's no fault in it. The fire effects, the optics that they used were spot on. So it boggles my mind why they're not doing this today. We're watching animated movies and expecting it to be real. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't feel the same.
Especially since the tools available to do these effects practically and build these things practically are light years more advanced than they were back then. The stuff that you can produce practically now, as far as robotics, as far as practical effects, as far as controlling pyro effects and things like that, all of that stuff is so much more advanced than it was back in the 80s, and yet we've given up on it.
If you want to see something that'll break your heart, go look up Studio ADI, Amalgamated Dynamics, on YouTube, and look at the stuff they did for the prequel to The Thing that got cut because some producer decided after they'd done all this work, he just wanted to use CGI.
It's the shortcut. I just watched what was it, 3,000 Years of Longing, because it's George Miller. Why not? And there are the most simplest effect shots in that video, that movie, that I'm like, whoa! I can see the line around the person's hats with the green screen behind them. And this shouldn't be happening. You can see the focal length difference. You can see how it's like, all right, I'm sucked out of it because it's so common now. Some of the effects that I've seen, you can go buy off of Action VFX and put it into your movies today. So, but looking back at those old school optics, it's like, wow, to have the studio and the resources to do that would save you a lot more money than it would just to try to do everything in post. So Dragonslayer is one of those movies. Yes, they had optic effects and they were doing stop motion animation, and it took a lot of time. But that time and effort and care translates to the screen. It's magic. It is true movie magic.
What's weird about that, Lance, is I feel like and there's a disconnect for them there, because this saves them time on set. They don't have to do a lot of set prep. They don't have to prepare atmospherics or lighting or a whole bunch of other things. I can have this tennis ball represent this thing. But then they kick it off to the VFX studio, and they said, like, we need this in a week now. So if they wanted to look 100% eye-fooling, all the time that they would have spent on set would have to be spent in the VFX warehouse, but they don't get that, and this is where you get this compression of VFX that starts to look chintzy and cheesy.
I think one of the things you get, and well, real quick, Lance, did you have any more to add in real quick?
Well, actually, I mean, I just think that's it. This is an example of movie magic at its best, and it fits the theme of the film. I mean, we see this dragon come to life, and we had never seen that before in this capacity. We had never seen it before. So this is what the selling point. They need to make it or break it, and they made it. They went that extra mile and made it happen. But look at what they had at that time. Jim Henson Studios was at the top of its peak, at Pyramid. I mean, you had some of the best animatronic people in the world in those days, and optical engineers. So in a sense, you always can say, well, what could have went wrong? So many things, but these people were so skilled. It's just not clicking a button and adding a filter to a computer screen and saying, make it go. This is a skilled profession.
And let's be honest, you just brought up Jim Henson. I forget what year it came out, and then I'm probably going to get beat over the head by my friends here later on, but Empire is right around this time, and you're going to get one of the most famous Jim Henson characters of all time in Yoda, who my opinion is, and you'll never convince me otherwise, the Yoda that we got as a puppet is superior to what you got from CGI every day of the week. The only thing you could never
single way.
Every way.
The only thing you could not do with that puppet was the lightsaber fighting, and that is it. Period. End of story. In every other way, that Yoda puppet and the performance you got out of it was superior. So.
Absolutely. Same with the dragon. It had emotion, and it worked. So once again, this is a movie to not only watch, but to study. As a filmmaker, you look at this movie and you study it. You look at, what film stock did they use to make it look that way? What lights were they using? Obviously, we have different lights and stuff today, but we can still achieve this. Oh, that lamp in the corner is a real prop. It wasn't a CGI prop that doesn't blend in with the environment. I mean, you build a set, you apply optics, and CGI has its place. I'm not entirely bashing it. It absolutely has its place, but it should not be dominant, because then it just ruins it.
And here's one example I could tell you right off the bat that I could think of CGI most definitely have as a place. It's lightsabers. The lightsaber CGI, you need a lightsaber that gives you that actual physical light that can reflect on the actors and everything. But to enhance the lightsaber and make it look better on film, you could enhance it through CGI. I think that's a great use of the technology.
Yeah, I'll say something like Godzilla versus Kong, and this works because the entire environment is CGI, and that's when CGI looks its best. If there's no practical in there at all, then your mind just accepts everything that's in there, because you're seeing the same thing. There's not that filter that you recognize.
To me, where the wild things are, the monsters,
great example,
and just how they made the mouths CGI and some of the eyes, it was very subtle, but it worked perfectly. That's all you needed.
Same thing they did with the eyes, the white eyes for Deadpool in the Deadpool movies. It's a very simple example, but it's like there was no way to really make those eyes and have the expression and everything practically. It would have been very, very difficult. So it works that way.
And people forget that, the reason why a lot of CGI failed with real film is because it was CGI. You can't make it exactly like film. You can get pretty dang close, and that was Lucas's beef. Well, I can do the CGI effects faster and better if I just shoot it on digital. It'll marry better. Be very careful of that, because you create a whole slew of different problems photographically, lighting-wise, camera-wise. So, there's a fine line, and I'm working on that right now, a fine line between real film photography and CGI. So you pick your poison, but I'll always try to go the practical route. But there will always be CGI, because in this day and age, there are just some things you shouldn't be doing practically, fire effects, and but it's got to be careful.
It's like any form of art. It's like when I write, or when an artist does art. You have all sorts of different tools to use, but when you lean on one at the expense of the other, then you are hamstringing yourself before you've even brought a product to your audience.
Absolutely.
Right tool for the right job.
Yeah, exactly. And so, excuse me, gentlemen, I'm going to go second this time. I'm going to jump in. So, one of the things, Jeff's ready to get me now because I'm going to go second.
Yeah, like my neck was stiff.
One of the things that occurred to me real quick, and then I'm going to get into some points I wanted to make was, Lance, you were talking about how great this film is and everything. And I think that's one of the things that I want to bring up, which is too often in today's world, we evaluate a film on how good it is based on how much money it made. Now, the two are not mutually exclusive, but just because a movie makes a lot of money doesn't mean it's a good film or even a good piece of cinema or a good piece of movie making. It just means it made a lot of money.
Yeah,
and there's nothing
between being a successful movie and a good movie.
Yeah, and there's no, and I'm not saying making a lot of money is a bad thing. I would love to make a lot of money on a piece of art myself. I'm hoping to, and I'm hoping that it will happen. But too many people seem to think that, because the latest Marvel movie made $1.5 billion, that it is the pinnacle of filmmaking. No, or the pinnacle.
You know what? When you said Marvel, I was at a meetup. And it was me, another filmmaker, and another comic book creator. We had products to show for. And there was a younger generation there. They all wanted to make Marvel movies. That was it. Just like earlier in my day, everybody wanted to be Kevin Smith or Tarantino. And now everybody wants to do Marvel. And one of my colleagues said, right, but the writing isn't very good. They're not very good. And one of the people said, well, it made $1 billion. And I was the one that said, so what? So what? Yep. Does that make it good? So you would settle for that? All right.
You should turn around and ask me, like, okay, so what do you think about Michael Bay's Transformers? Made $1 billion. What do you think about it as a film?
It's hilarious. And it's like, okay, so it made $1 billion. So what? Doesn't mean it's any good. It's commercial, it's popular, it has its place in the pantheon of entertainment, but what does that mean? Will we be talking about that 10, 20, 40 years ago? From now, like we're doing Dragonslayer? I doubt it. I sincerely doubt it.
Yeah,
especially more recent stuff.
And I will say, go back to the, and they'll say, oh, of course they will. I said, go back and look in history. Look at what the most popular movies were in the mid-40s. Versus the movies that have held up now. Most of the movies that were killing it, slaying at the box office, people don't even talk about them anymore. Same thing with music. There's music that survives and there's music that dies, and it's not always what is most popular. So that said, I wanted to get that out of the way. Now, real quick, I did want to talk a little bit about the effects. And, I was talking about how they saved the dragon reveal for later. Well, I think one of the things that when you have to do things practically, when you have to create these robots or these animatronics, that you have to spend money and time planning out your scenes, it means that you have to really think about your shots and think about your shot selection and save your reveals and things for when it is most advantageous and serves your story best. If it's CGI, I'll bet you we would have gotten a full shot. We would have gotten full frontal nudity of Vermithrax very early in the film, just because you can. You don't have to save it for the end. And with that said, I'm going to go back to Vermithrax again, and then I am going to go to Jeff, and then I'm going to go to Steve. Is that one of the things that is so cool about the reveal on this dragon and looking at the dragon is that because this is practical, or because it was a go motion, which is a practical effect with,
stop motion animation with the smoothing put to it.
Right, with models and things like that, you are getting physical light.
Yeah.
And physical light interacting with that object. So they have created these scales, and you're getting the actual reflection off the scales and light in the eyes, actual fire reflecting in the eyes and things like that. Things that are very, very difficult for CGI to do and do well. And because of that, it gives you a realism to the dragon that you could not achieve with CGI. And, and I think, like Lance said, this is why it needs to be studied from a movie making perspective to get an idea of how to do these things and integrate them together. And I think this is really reflective here. At the same time, I will say that there are some effects that if it was given today, if you remastered this film and you did CGI enhancement on some of the magical effects, it might improve the film. But that's using the tools where the tools can be used to best purpose. Now, I wouldn't want to see him do that because I enjoy the film in the format it's in now. But if I was going to add modern technology to it, I would do it for when they like conjure magic, to add a little spice to it or something like that. Not to take away from what they did, which I thought was very good. So that's the way I kind of see that. So with that said, I'm going to go to Jeff. What did you think of the production?
Okay, so I'm going to dig into special effects because that's my forte here. And CGI would have been perfectly applicable for a lot of the magical effects, and in some cases would have even looked better. No argument about that. The effects have really come an incredibly long way in a short amount of time, if you're willing to put the time and money into it. But there's still very much a charm to looking at these optical effects where they were literally painting on the cells of the film, and there's a part of me that kind of still delights in that when I watch an older film. So I enjoyed that very much. Like when the sorcerer's looking into the flames, those are drawn painted flames, and they've got this cool little flickering light to give the appropriate thing. And there's a part of me that's thinking about all the layers of thing that's going into making that look the way it looks, and I just enjoy that at a very technical level. The clouds, for instance, when he conjures up the storm, that's a thick fluid, milky fluid suspended in water or oil.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's such a cool effect. So.
It's a really cool effect, and it's a really old school effect. And the last guy who was still doing stuff like that, as far as I know, was I forgot his name. It's not Steve Wang, but it's the guy who worked on Ghostbusters and The Abyss. A lot of really incredible stuff. He worked on Predator before he got fired, and that wasn't his fault because the production wanted to have him make this crappy monster, and so Stan Winston got a big boost in his career out of that. But yeah, it's this fluid suspended, and you just kind of stir it up, and it moves out like a cloud, and it's just really neat seeing how they would come up with stuff, just like the old transporter thing. It used to be glitter in a glass of water, and they'd stir it up and just composite that in. Yes.
Just to give you a quick point on that, though, so that effect, which can be filmed and then slowed down or sped up depending on how you want to do it, takes all of maybe, I don't know, probably an hour to set up and 5 minutes to actually execute.
Yeah, somebody did not have to develop a piece of software to figure out how to do that.
And still get it wrong, because we still don't know how to accurately model fluid dynamics in a computer.
I mean, I see stuff that looks really impressive. I remember like when they first came out with the American Werewolf in Paris, how bad the fur looked because they had to do a digital program for each piece of fur. And I look at things like Kong now, and fur looks really good. And I harken back to Harryhausen, where the Kong stop motion puppet's covered in a rabbit pelt, and you can see where he's manipulating it because it depresses and compresses the fur, and so it doesn't look natural. So there is that place there. And Phil Tippett's work on here, as I said, is just legendary. This is a guy who actually worked on things like Star Wars. He was the lead animator on the AT-AT attack on the Hoth base. He also worked on Starship Troopers. He worked on Jurassic Park. As they transitioned into computer modeling, they still had him do animations for the dinosaurs because they almost went stop motion. So the computer animators would know how to make it work right. So they had to lean on the old master to make it look as good as it did. But his dragon work is the thing that just blows me away. And you were talking about the reveal of the character. They all took the accidental lesson of Jaws. Shark wouldn't work. Spielberg wanted to show it off a lot, but he couldn't. So he had to work around it, and he thought of really creative ways to do it. And then that became a standard because everybody realized that was a lot more effective. Even though I don't remember if Alien came out the year before or whatnot, they followed the same thing, kind of building to the alien and, just keeping it just out of sight and just giving us little hints. And Dragonslayer is so good at that. You get a claw here. You get to see the back of the horns and the heads there. You see the tail thrash. And here's something to say about that: the amount of detail they put in. And I have this wonderful book on the modeling of Smaug from the Lord of the Rings films, and it's going into talking about how like they've got details in there in the model to show how Smaug is aged and the battles he's been through. I can't see that on screen. I look for it. I've got the book. I look for it, and I think Smaug is a great model. I think he's a terrific looking dragon. But when I see that tail crash down on the cart, I see flaking skin. I see patches where scales are missing because we've already seen this thing is shedding scales like crazy.
You also feel the weight.
Yeah, well, I see missing spines along the back. I see the age of the creature. I know this is an old, withered up dragon when I look at it, despite the fact that it's immensely powerful, that it digs its way out of an avalanche. So it's not weak. It causes the kingdom to shake when it gets loose. So, you know, there's a part of me that goes like, just imagine this sucker in its prime, what it could be doing. Really some top level Game of Thrones kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So I see all this and I can appreciate it. And the most brilliant scene to me before we get that beautiful reveal in the cave of the burning water where like she just comes out and fans out her wings before she's going to let loose on Galen is actually going back to Ian McDermott. What a terrific way to build this, because like we kept getting these crane shots to give you the imposing angle of the dragon. Everybody's looking up as the crane rises and you get that POV of the dragon. But what do? The priest has to look upon his enemy. So instead of running in fear, he crawls to the hole. He looks down, he faces his fear, and the dragon comes up and he starts standing at the same time, and he obscures the dragon as they're coming eye to eye with each other, and then the dragon goes beyond. And for me, that's actually the coolest shot of the dragon because I just love the staging of it. It's like so good.
But once again, it's forcing you to think about your shot and to think about what you're going to do with these models and how best to save your reveal and everything else, because A, because you're forced to, but B, because you're working with a known quantity. I mean, a lot of time when you're doing the CGI effects, you're not going to know what it's going to look like until months after you're done shooting.
Yeah, I remember, like, speaking of Ghostbusters too, since we were talking about McNichol, Sigourney Weaver, you know, she has a thing where this purple blob jumps out of her tub and attacks her, and they kept telling me, "Oh, it's going to look like this," and then the next time, like, well, it might look like this, or it might look like this. So she had no idea what she was supposed to react to. Like they hadn't even defined in the concept art what it was going to be at that point. But like when you look at this model of this dragon, when you look at the maquette, or when you look at the puppet, you know precisely what you're getting into, and that is so much better as an actor for you to actually see what you're doing. And again, I've got to hand it to Phil Tippett when it came to the animation. When you see Vermithrax flying, I love how it spent so much of its time gliding, because it is this very large creature, and it's got to have wings that have a certain anatomical spread to allow you to accept flight. And so it doesn't make sense for something this big to expend a lot of energy flapping. So like this sucker would get some altitude and then just cruise. It would glide in. Loved it. Just all of these details that come to make this world live and breathe, and the same for the creatures within it.
Absolutely. Steve, what did you think of the production value of this film?
I think very good for its time. In certain ways, it is better than a lot of these pure CGI things that you see now. I certainly feel like they put more effort into it than a lot of films do now, and I think that definitely shows. One of the things that I really find interesting is how well they were able to make some of the environments look real with the technology they had on the time, because I was looking at some of the special features for House of the Dragon and the way that they did the Battle on the Beach episode. And it was really kind of interesting because it's like they could not use an actual beach. They were just not able to do that because they were of inclement weather, because of, the sand and how it would mess things up, things like this. And so what they were forced to do is, okay, we're going to have a set that simulates a beach, and then we're going to CGI little things in. You couldn't do that in 1982. And yet, with this film, I think they did a pretty good job given certain similar situations. Yeah, they had to use a set, for the ledge in which the wizard is standing there facing the dragon. You have to have simulated rocks and things like this, and to show the earthquake and the avalanche and whatnot. But it's like you're into it enough. I also think that in regards to the dragon, I think they did a really good job using horror tropes to make the fantasy of the dragon work. So yeah, that's exactly. And so when you're talking about Jaws, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing they were doing. They're showing little bits of the dragon, and then later on you see the big thing, and then
it made the dragon legitimately scary, not just a big dumb monster.
I will say that as much as we were talking about CGI for the magic effects, the hand, I'm assuming it was hand-drawn animation they did for the teleportation of the wizard at the end. I couldn't ask for anything better now.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks that good. So
yeah. I mean, and there are definitely things you could improve with it, but I mean, I think that for 1982, it's fine. And honestly, I kind of like that it looks a little bit like Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I just you kind of get a little bit more of a magical flavor to the scenery, and I think that it kind of gives a sense of a mythic England or wherever this is set that you really couldn't get with the way they shoot it today. And so you kind of appreciate it when you do see that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Awesome. Hey, I think this has been a great discussion. I think we could talk about this movie for another hour at least. But I think this has been an incredibly great discussion. So, for all of you out there, if you haven't checked this movie out, go check it out. It's worth watching. I think this movie has been incredibly influential on the genre. I think it was incredibly influential in a number of different ways. And I really do think it was a crossroads film for all of you out there. I think this is where a lot of the movie making, the old movie making, met some what was modern movie making, and it combined the best of both elements at the time and created something truly magical. And I mean that in the best sense of the word. So with that, I will say that our next fantasy movie that we are going to review next week is going to be The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. So we're going backwards in time. We're going to look at where that one of the best examples of stop motion animation, that ever was, that led into the go motion, and just another incredible story and something that, Sinbad. Everyone wants to talk about, how the past, they weren't talking about stories and everything that were outside of the European influence, but here they were talking about something directly out of the Arabian Nights, and all of this. So just incredibly, and it was very, if I remember right, it was a very popular as well. So we're going to be talking about Golden Voyage of Sinbad, just a great film.
I remember the theater being packed when I went to see it as a kid.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But we talked about Dragonslayer today. Go check it out. It's really cool. If you've seen it before, go watch it again because it's worth another watch. Just a great movie. And with that, I want to thank my co-host. Thank you so much, Steve.
Really good. Thanks for having me. I think this was really fun discussion to watch. And honestly, this film is one of those quietly influential films that's hit on so much of fantasy when you don't even know it until you see it. So for that reason alone, I think this is definitely one to keep an eye on. And until next time, Dracarys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lance.
Hey, thanks for having me. This was a great discussion. This is a great flick. I hope people take the time to appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Jeff.
I'm just really happy to get more eyes on this film. This film is really deserving of a lot more attention. I understand why it didn't work at the box office at the time, but I am glad it became a cult classic and that we were able to share this with more people and maybe a whole new generation of fans.
Absolutely. So, and to all you out there, thank you so much for watching Cinema Crusaders, and we will talk to you next time on the next episode of Cinema Crusaders. Thanks, everybody. We're out.
See ya.